So please give her a warm welcome. There we go.
Lots of time cues.
Yes, I'll give you a little wave.
I can talk about this like forever, and I can't. So yeah, please do.
Okay.
And I may check in on time as well, because having said which, quite a lot of the AI myths were dispelled first thing this morning by Andy from Hertzian, I think. And we touched on quite a lot going through. So I'm going to take a slightly different approach, going to cover some of the same ground, but going to look very specifically at what we can do when we use images to think about myths. So I'm going to take that approach because we have covered quite a lot, and I think this will pull together quite a few things that have been discussed. So quick bit on from WeandAI, which is the organisation behind the project I'm going to talk about, which is Better Images of AI. Some contact details there for me. And, sorry, was someone still trying to... Yeah, definitely take the contact details, want to hear from everybody. And I touched upon the fact that WeandAI was set up to activate diverse communities to make AI work for everybody. And that is a lot about increasing people's awareness, understanding of AI. But what we discovered as we were going into communities, we've got these three kind of main programs. One is workshops explaining AI in society to, the role of AI in society, the impact on non-technical people, and then kind of making them community champions for their own community so they can feed back and make their information relevant to the actual needs and lives of the people they're talking to. So rather than saying, I want to talk to you about deep learning, they're actually engaging with issues that matter to that community. And we worked on providing them with packages of information that are relevant, that are curated, that are explained, that they can then take in. So that's what we started with. But as we were doing with this, we realised that we weren't starting from a blank sheet of paper. So when we said to someone, let me tell you about AI, they already had a picture in their head about what AI was. So we kind of decided that it might be worth looking at an intervention even before we can get to people, which is by changing what some of those pictures are of AI. And I'm the third person to use this picture today, so thanks everyone. And we, in starting to look at the way that AI is portrayed in popular media, in blogs, in company literature, we found that there are an awful lot of people also working on this from universities, activists, civil society, and a lot of independent people who just kind of are fed up of finding images like this when they try and illustrate something on AI. So the key thing to say on this one is that obviously it's very prevalent, we've all used it today, but I find it incredible that one of the biggest barriers to innovation as identified by the National AI Strategy is the public lack of trust in AI. So at the same time as we're talking about, we want trusted AI, businesses need consumers to trust AI, we bombard them with images that are not all as extreme as this, but as you'll get on to see, kind of are along the same vein as this kind of robot ideal. So our key partners on the Better Images project, which WeandAI are kind of the legal entity behind it, but we work with Leverhulme Centre for Future Intelligence. There's a researcher there, Dr. Kanter de Haal, who's done some seminal work on the whiteness of AI, which is, when robots are all seen as white, what does that say about intelligence, and what does it say if you're not white, and those kind of correlations, and you start to think about those images we take for granted, which kind of white robots are actually have an awful lot of issues to do with some quite kind of crazy history, and BBC R&D, who are I'm really hoping they're not going to get their funding cut as part of the announcement made yesterday. They're the key partners, but we also work with the Turing Institute, with Ada Lovelace Institute, with a number of different universities around the UK, Europe, and we're just starting to work with UC Berkeley actually. So needs to be global. So does AI look like this? And we've all used these images. There's no judgment. I've used these images. We don't have much choice. Some of us like them. Some of us haven't thought too much about them. But mainly, that's the only choice you get on Google, on Canva, on Weebly, on Shutterstock, on whatever it is, you search for AI images, this is what you get. Normally, people don't have time to think too deeply about it, or maybe your comms person's done it who, doesn't even know this isn't AI, and this is what happens. Why is it important that these images are reinforcing myths? Why is it a problem? Well, there's a really good website, and in fact it's part of our project, is the person that built this, called aimyths.org. I've got references at the back, but I really recommend looking at this website. It's an absolute kind of masterclass on the problem with AI myths in these categories. I'm going to look at it a bit differently, but yeah, just to say this is part of our inspiration for our project, and Alexa Steinbrück, who did this, is with us. So can't go through all the reasons why, but do check out this website if you're interested. But basically, it's a lot to do with trust, and it's a lot to do with public understanding, and it's a lot to do with the ability of people to not make informed decisions, or to be rather actually to make bad decisions, so the ability of empowering bad actors as well as just not thinking things through. So myth number one, AI is artificial. So even the term artificial intelligence actually is not particularly helpful. So of course people are going to find it hard to understand, because without learning a bit more, because what does it actually mean? Another recommendation, Kate Crawford's book Atlas of AI. If you're interested in this kind of thing, thoroughly recommend it. And she's done a whole book going around the world, looking at all the places that AI is physically created, the actual processes, the physical process, physical materials, the people that are all physical that are making it. And basically there's nothing artificial about it. It's part of our world, it's running our world, and the artificial is a bit of a red herring. This is quite an artificial picture. I've kind of replaced it with a lithium mine in Chile, because really we're talking about something that is very intrinsic to the world that we're in. Myth number two, in artificial intelligence, AI is intelligent. Well, Andy discussed very well the difference between general and narrow intelligence, and the problem with pictures like this is that people think that we're at the stage of general intelligence, and that, we have sentient robots that are going to take our jobs and take over the world. And in actual fact, the intelligence is not only very narrow. There are people that argue that it's not intelligent at all. And what we do know is that it's not like human intelligence. Humans can use the kind of elasticity, plasticity, whatever, I'm not a neuro person, of the brain to make all sorts of connections that AI fundamentally is not. So I've put up some brain images. Brain images are the most easy to find on the internet. Everyone uses them. But actually what we're saying when we're equating human intelligence to this kind of node-like brains is that we're saying that they're comparable, and they're not. Yes, neural networks may have been inspired by some of the ways that AI can work, but there are more differences than there are similarities. So glowing brains. You'll notice the colour blue as well. We can talk a lot about, kind of how futuristic that makes it look, and, everything being very futuristic distances people from the AI that's in their lives right now. Obviously quite male, traditionally, so, lots of things going on there. So replacing the kind of robot on the blackboard. This is a great video from the Alan Turing Institute, which again I've referenced, which basically just says, what is an algorithm, and it talks about sets of instructions and how different that is from the way that our brains operate. Myth number three, AI has agency. This for me is the most fundamental one, and it's the problem when we anthropomorphize AI too much, or when we anthropomorphize it to people that don't understand what it is that they think that it makes decisions. And it's not just in images that this happens in news articles. Every day, tech press, you'll say, this AI can see X, Y, Z, this AI can make a decision, they can't. It's absolute nonsense. AI can't make any decisions. It can't see anything, it just follows its list of instructions. And so when we devolve that kind of authority and decision making to an AI, we take away our responsibility. And that for me is the key thing. So you saw a great example of that last year with the with the A-level algorithm, which probably wasn't AI, but it's the same kind of principle, where they went to an algorithm instead of exams, and guess what? Loads of people from disadvantaged backgrounds were discriminated against, and it had to be scrapped and replaced with teacher grading. And our Prime Minister actually said it was a mutant algorithm. So it's this idea of devolving responsibility. Algorithms can't mutate, it's not possible, they do exactly what you tell them to do. And this devolvement of responsibility is kind of not saying, hey, guess what, we didn't think through what we were asking it to do very well. It's saying it was the algorithm, and there's a real problem of blaming the tech for things that are human, and that's why AI having agency is a real problem. This picture is one of my favourites because isn't it great that the robots need to use computers, and headphones, headphones, like obviously they are the computer, but this is what people see, and there's a million variations of this image. One of them was used just this week by the UK Defence Agency for an event, so yeah. I've replaced it here with, because it's also someone working at a screen, with one of the images from our new gallery of better images of AI, which is also, it's problematic in some ways because it's dehumanising the person, but it's trying to surface the people behind it. And it's not just, people in suits in data science centres, in big data centres that we see in stock images. It's, people who annotate data, who label data all over the world. It could be someone working from their house in Myanmar who's labelling data for supervised learning. And so this idea is that the picture is that they're hidden, and it's the hidden people, millions of hidden people that train label data that enable AI to actually work. AI can be objective. This is, if you think that AI has agency, then you can start to decide, think, well, maybe it's a good agent or a bad agent. Obviously, it doesn't have agency, and it can't be objective. We've talked quite a lot about bias and the fact that basically it's not just a question. There's a lot of work now that's being done on bias mitigation within models. So I work with a bias mitigation software platform, and they look at debiasing data sets, and bias can get in within the data set, it can get in within the model, it can get in within the actual within the actual product that's being built. But obviously it all comes back a step before that. Once you're mitigating bias in a model, you've already built it, and so there needs to be more focus on thinking about what it is you're trying to build. So there are lots of contentious uses of AI in immigration. The UK government's been challenged last year on an immigration algorithm that was proven to be racist. There's all sorts of issues over facial recognition use, etc. And so sometimes it's not, however much work we do on the bias mitigation, and you can definitely talk more about that if anyone's interested. You need to take a step back and think about the societal biases that are coming into it. But I'm always shocked actually by how many very renowned computer scientists still will say, and there's huge Twitter debates about this, will say technology is neutral. Technology is never neutral. And we touched again earlier on, you'll probably recognise this picture. This is Joy Buolamwini, who was the one that found out, the researcher at MIT who found out that she could only be recognised by a facial recognition program when she put a white mask on. It literally couldn't see her. She didn't exist until she did. She's done a great documentary with Shalina Kantaya, which is on Netflix. Again, I've referenced it. If you haven't seen it, it's a really great documentary. So yeah, the technology can never be neutral. On the subject of bias, just doing a quick plug here on WeandAI, we have we've worked as part of the work I mentioned of building up resource sets that are useful for people. We've worked in particular, who have particular interest. We've worked to curate resources, so whether it's videos or academic papers, that all relate to the kind of the impact of race, by which I mean ethnicity, and AI, and all the different touch points. So it's not just facial recognition. There are many, many other places. And we start with the point of, you know, someone's life. So is it someone who's looking for a job? Is it someone who's on social and digital media? Someone earlier mentioned Facebook and content moderation. Well, it's proven that, you know, that their content moderation discriminates against people, that people are more likely to be flagged if they're black than if they're not. So if they're using like a BLM hashtag, that's hate speech, but, you know, other things get through. So that there are always, you know, going to be things to talk about. So I'd be happy to, anyone who's interested in that, I'd love to talk that through. Right, myth number 5, AI can solve all problems. I think it was Woe who kind of said, or it may have been Andy who said earlier, yeah, you know, there are some things it's just not sensible to use AI for, and there is so much hype in the media. This picture was taken from article interviewing Jack Ma and Elon Musk, who were basically got this kind of AI utopia of, you know, like automate everything and it's all going to be wonderful. Whereas actually there's an incredible amount of potential risk that is done by AI. There's a good list here of the types of problems it can introduce as well as solve. So it can't be used for everything, but, you know, shouldn't stop us trying to think of, you know, good use cases, but that's why it's so important for us to understand the limitations before we, you know, kind of try and do it all. So I've replaced this picture with a very similar picture, but of course this is sort of very fitting. Credit to MGM there, the Wizard of Oz, where of course the Wizard of Oz was shown to be a man, which is exactly what. You know, well, we're trying to get more women in AI, but, you know, it's basically very similar kind of thing. It's actually people that make AI, people that make the decisions, and you know, as people working with or in AI, the responsibility is, you know, is immense to make that decision. I wanted to move on there because of the Wizard of Oz, this kind of idea of this deification of AI, and if you look up trustworthy AI, you will see loads of these pictures, this kind of Michelangelo God and man being reproduced as God and man and robot, and quite often the robot has started to take the God role, and so it's this idea of where we're kind of devolving a bit to you know, thinking this techno-solutionism that, you know, AI can solve everything. So I just wanted to throw that in. And that's the picture that it comes from, and another plug for our site, which is Beth Singler, who's an expert in kind of AI and religion, has written a post for our blog on the AI creation meme, and quite what this means about, you know, when we deify AI. Final picture, and I love this one, on, you know, why AI, you know, can't do everything. The difficulties AI has in telling the difference between a kitten and a croissant are absolutely immense, and I think they managed, but, you know, was it worth it? I think I would say. I hope that's given you something to think about. We talked about the kind of dystopian versus utopian idea, starting with dystopian, you know, kind of finishing with the utopian. Obviously, the difference, the reality is somewhere in between. And on our site, where we launched, what we wanted to do was to try and collate images so we're not just saying to you, don't use shiny blue brains, we're actually coming up with something alternative, because there is really very little out there and it is incredibly difficult. I found it when building the website, etc. So we've tried to kind of commission artwork. What I'd love everyone to do is, if you can put me in touch with artists, I know how creative, you know, and how artistic it is in Cornwall. We need lots of different ideas to try and think about how do we embody the unembodied, how do we try and come up with iconic images that, you know, aren't, you know, white male thinky robots. So we've got some images, we've made a start. This one, what we really aim to do when we do it is we're not just misrepresenting AI, we're actually teaching people something about AI. So this picture talks a bit about computer vision, explains a little bit about computer vision. This one I was talking to someone about this earlier. This is one of my favourites because it's quite an iconic image, but it's actually generated by AI, but the artist behind it wanted to try and represent NLP, so those kind of large scale data sets used in NLP, things like GPT-3, how do you represent that? Well, between him and the AI, they came up with this huge pile of books, and again, we've got the explanation of like why this might be a better image to go with a picture about large-scale language models than a white thinky robot. And then also different industries. Learning about how AI is used in different industries. At the moment, we're using the same picture for each industry. So this looks into how is AI used in pharma. And lots of different ways that we could start looking at, this is explainable AI and looks at black boxes, etc. So please get in touch with volunteers. I volunteer for this. We just want to try and make that intervention. Really need creative input, need lots of different opinions and ideas from around the world. Otherwise, it's just us saying, those pictures are bad, ours are good. We don't want that. We want this to be a community thing. And they are the references. So I don't know if you've been circulating the slides. Anything that I've mentioned is referenced there. And I think that is it.